Jason DeWar, firefighter, Real
Pretty big firefighter out of Dripping Springs.
All right, Jim Snow. I started my career on the Cleveland. I worked on 3 different forests. I currently reside on the San Bernardino National Forest as Captain 52 on the San Jack. Sorry I missed the last meeting we had. I was part of the Region 5 Primary Leader Academy developmental group and one of the coaches there, and I felt that I needed to finish what I started. Fuels. I like fuels. I'm really interested in fuels. Fuels is one of the real only areas we can control in our job. Unlike showing up to a wildfire, fuels you can practice and you can imagine where it's going to end up, the end result. And within data, you can prove what you want it to read. Is that good?
Whatever you want to say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Charles Scott, Superintendent LP Sub 2.
You don't understand, it's alright.
Josh Tomato, Clubhouse.
I'm Susie Carlson from the San Bernardino, and I'm Patrol 57. And the reason why I took this class is because we have I think an increase in fuels as a whole, probably for our nation, but a lot for California. It's a political issue. It's important. We have climate change issues. So I think that to maintain the standard, to go forward, integrate it to the people, and to learn new techniques with that. I'm kind of new at it, so I'm just interested in learning more about it.
Lawrence Miranda, dispatcher here.
Oh, buddy.
Scott Saka, engineer on 326.
Derek Codry, Palomar Hot Shots, firefighter.
Jose Ortega, Palomar Hot Shots.
Reyes Royal, Palomar Hot Shots.
Sarah Billings, fire ecologist on the Pumas National Forest.
Maria Mohon Klein, Squad Boss on the Hot Shots.
So Robert Langston, I'm a firefighter in Camp Holly, currently doing the detail in Alpine. I'm from Puerto Rico originally, so I was in the Marine 6 years and got out, finished my bachelor's degree in Puerto Rico in business administration. I joined the National Guard in Puerto Rico, and then I met a girl when I was in the Marines in Descanso, so I ended up here in California. I'm still in the National Guard. I'm currently a major in Manhattan Beach. I'm an operations officer for an engineer battalion. And other than that, when I was in Puerto Rico, I visited the Junque rainforest, so really different than the Forest Service. And I've been 6 years in the Forest Service. I love it. And what interests me to take this class is basically it's the other aspect of what we actually do, being a forestry technician. All we do is fire, but I want to know what's the science behind everything, and I know this will help me understand more and all the aspects and make me a better firefighter at the end.
And that's where you were at, the first class?
Yeah.
Your duty?
Yeah.
Third grade.
Oh yeah, I was in the first class. I was doing a military planning conference for some training in the summer, so I apologize I wasn't here.
No worries. Sure.
Code Bruce, firefighter out of Camp Holly.
Edgar Bucas, firefighter, Descanso.
All right, thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Stephen, this is your third class?
Third class.
Third class, very good. So you're in fine standings with a lot of your colleagues already. This is the second day of the course?
It's the second time we've all got together.
Yeah, very good. And how many more you got left?
Like 6 or 7.
Okay, you're going to finish up?
In April?
April?
Yeah.
Very good. So you're all committed, I assume? Stephen has a great program going here. I don't know if you realize that or not, but if you haven't heard through the rank and file yet, being in third class, a lot of your cohorts have gone through it and have spoken very highly of it. So you got a great opportunity of some, local training, so to speak, in fuels. Fuels management is one of those areas that opportunity abounds. When I started my career back in 1977 on the Los Padres, the first thing I did was manipulating vegetation stands. And I mean, we're the Forest Service after all, and you know, basically when you think about the Forest Service, we're out there manipulating the vegetation for all kinds of reasons. For us, it's primarily to protect communities, have strategic fuel breaks located around the landscape to help suppression efforts. But we also use fuel modifications for habitat improvement, water yield. There's just all kinds of reasons why we're out there messing around with vegetation. And it's all good practical stuff. Has a lot of bearing on what we do as an agency. For me, I've been on forest where we would actually burn up to 25,000 acres a year, and that was in the in Region 8, in the longleaf pine / pine ecosystem. And we used to put fire on the landscape almost every single day. Any day that we could, we did, and that's why we had such large acreage. Great benefits to the ecosystem. You know, one of the reasons why we are so challenged with our mega fires nowadays is due to the fact that, you know, the stands are overdense, they're overstocked, a lot of ladder fuels, and the exclusion of fire for many years has built that fuel up. And so, obviously, the science will tell us that, you know, fire is an integral part of the ecosystem, and if you exclude it, things are going to get out of whack. And so I got to tell you, when I worked in Florida and we were doing 25,000 acres a year, I mean, you could just hear the relief in the woods. You know, getting rid of all that, you know, young growth, and get rid of the ladder fuels. You know, actually killing some trees, providing some gap opportunities for some habitat improvement. Fantastic stuff. You know, but then you look at the other extreme, which for me is the Cleveland, and we average, you know, roughly 2,500 acres of fuel treatment per year, which is a drop in the bucket compared to some units. But yet every acre that we treat is a very important acre for us. It may not be a lot, but when it comes to our community protection and firefighter safety, every acre that we get is an important acre. Regardless of how big or small the program is. I got to tell you that for me, our mountaintops are probably our most important resource down here in Southern California. I'm referring to Laguna Mountain and Palomar Mountain, a mixed conifer. And Stephen, I don't know how much your program gets into the, you know, the stand, you know, like chaparral versus, you know, tree stands, but
Yeah, we're talking about ecology today, and we're going to Palomar Mountain tomorrow.
okay, very good.
We'll talk about this stuff.
Yep. So my point being is that these mountaintops are like our last refuge for mixed conifers down here. And let alone great habitat provided. You know, we have southern spotted owl down here. You know, which is an important species for us. But treating those mountaintops to build resiliency into them, you know, is something that is very important to me. And it's not that the mid-elevation chaparral stands are. It's, you know, for one, they're a challenge to get to, and they're all over the place. And usually where we're doing chaparral treatments, it's right around communities. But our mountaintops, with the mixed conifer component and the chaparral component, really deserves our attention. And because I'm quite fearful that if we get a fire started down in the lower elevations, mid-slope or whatever, and it goes running up those mountaintops are at risk for stand replacing fires. And we can't afford that down here. We lose that resource, we are going to be hurt. So keep an eye to the mountaintops, let alone the chaparral around the communities. It's important stuff. I think probably the other thing that I would want to mention to you is I'm challenged by the pressures of the WUI. You know, we spend a lot of our time, you spend a lot of your time in the WUI, and it's all good stuff. Society expects us to be in their backyards protecting their communities. Politicians expect us to be in their backyards protecting their communities and citizens. We have an expectation that we are out there protecting our communities and saving lives. And that's an important element of our job. But the challenge is that we keep seeing this leapfrog development occurring in San Diego County, Orange, Riverside counties. Communities are continuing to spread out into the wildland interface. At some point, we're not going to have the ability and capacity to manage those wildlands for the threat of fire. And this is something that Stephen and I have had a lot of discussions on. Stephen's a program builder. He likes to build program. He wants to be burning, manipulating 25,000 acres of vegetation every year. But we don't have the capacity to do that, obviously. And I'm thankful for that. Yeah, wishful thinking. But you know, as these developments occur out in the wildlands, there's going to be an expectation that the Forest Service is out there treating vegetation. And you know what? We may very well be pressed to have to do that. But I'm taking a firm stance of saying, you know, enough's enough. Recently, the Board of Supervisors has been, in San Diego, has been looking at some development down along the I-8 corridor, basically. And we put them on notice that they were planning on burning in some areas that we figured were going to be the next mega fire down here in San Diego County. And hopefully our concerns have raised enough insight into the county planning department that they're going to rethink some of the developments that they were planning on doing. So we're getting involved now in the initial stages of community development. We're going to the county planners and saying, hey, this area is ripe for a wildfire. There's no guarantee that we can we can protect communities or lives if you build here. And so we're looking at them to build in buffer zones. You know, when you look at communities nowadays, almost every one of them just butts right up to the national forest. You know, private property right up to the national forest. If they don't have their 100-foot of clearance, guess who they're picking up the phone and calling? Me. I actually get phone calls from members of the public who live adjacent to the national forest, and you know, they got this beautiful stand to chaparral in their backyard. You know, just perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. It's the way it should be. It's the way nature intended it to be. And they're picking up the phone and saying, hey, you guys, you got to cut this stuff down. It's threatening my property. And, you know, I got to tell you, in general, we're very responsive to those type of inquiries. You know, next phone call goes to the Senator Feinstein. And the next thing you know, you're getting a congressional inquiry on fuel load, you know, in such and such a community, and you're responding, and you have to respond. You know, you got to deal with that stuff. But I'm liking the approach that the forest is taking now of working with the county planners to have discussions about where they're putting communities, and if they are putting communities, they need to know that the burden is not going to be put on the Forest Service to go out there and mow their backyards for them, so to speak. I often think that the general public thinks that we're landscapers, and obviously that's farthest from the truth. We're not. So fuels management is pretty exciting from my perspective. You know, we have a lot of great opportunities to do a lot of great work out there. You know, again, I think it's important that you just don't focus on the community protection side of the house, but on the resource side of the house, the ecosystem services, the ecological restoration attributes of the fuels program. Knowing what bushes to leave and what bushes to remove. You know, not slicking it down to mineral soil all over the place, but being very smart about what types of species that we leave to accomplish our objectives, if that's possible at all. So it's a great field. It's a great program, and I want you to know that I am proud as heck that each of you are in here learning about it. It'll be a resource, lessons that you'll carry with you throughout your career. Because if you stay in the Forest Service or any natural resource agency, you can bet some aspect of your job is going to be manipulating vegetation to get it to a desired condition to meet your objectives, whatever they may be. So it's all good stuff. That's the footprint of the Forest Service, manipulating vegetation. So I'll leave it at that. Any questions, perspectives to share with me? Anything rattle your cage?
It's an opportunity to have a talk with the forest supervisor. Any questions?
Fair enough.
It's a safe place, remember?
Yeah, absolutely is. Absolutely
Safe
is.
place on you. Here we go, there's this.
It's actually not about that. I was just saying be careful with your shoelaces with your.
Oh, yeah, very good. I like that.
It is the first place.
You know, I usually put about 3 or 4 bowls in these because the laces are too long.
All right, well, with that, thank you, Stephen, for having me over, and enjoy the class, folks, and I'll be looking forward to graduation.
Yeah, being in April.
Okay.
You playing this. Thanks for coming by. I really
Yeah, you
appreciate
betcha.
it.
My pleasure.
All right. Sign-in sheet. Is that going around? Did it get held up? And then there it is. Student agenda. I knew I had some agendas for you guys. So today is going to be what I would call a first really sort of typical class, where everything that we have been playing. Actually, I noticed everybody is here today, which it's actually very rare to have all of the students that are in the class actually in the class, and once it's only happened a few times in the past. So it's actually kind of cool to see all 19 of you here. So take a look around. This is the class. Oh wait, did I hand out? Is that the agenda or the reading? Well, that's fine. You can keep it, whatever. You'll need it for later. The very top page I had was the student agenda. All right. My secretary screwed this up. I'll have to talk to her when we get back. All right, I'll tell you what. Wait. This one says Unit 2 reading assignment. Let's see what this is under here.
Don't worry about it. You're short. You don't want me to take the assignment, alright.
Short one, what, reading assignment? No, I got a whole nother stack right here. Apparently I screwed that one up. Hey, I told you I'm not perfect, right?
Yeah, you know, thanks.
Anybody else need a Unit 2 reading assignment?
Yeah.
All right. You guys keep it.
I have been given. Thanks.
Well, I'll tell you what, at our first break, I'll go and, sorry about that, I'm not sure what happened there. I will, go and make you some copies of the agenda. Actually, it's kind of important because it has our next meeting dates and has a location and stuff. So anyway, what I was saying is that this is one of the first typical sort of class periods. What we do in a typical class period is we have a lecture the first day. You have had a reading assignment from the previous class, the Aldo Leopold in this case. And then tomorrow, I think the weather's going to work out. I need to look up at Palomar. I don't know. What's Palomar looking like right now? You guys have any idea? Think we'll be able to hit the main roads at least? Yeah, if we can at least hit the main roads, we can stop at Observatory and a few of the spots and talk. So that's going to work out. So then a field trip. And then just to reiterate, Thursday, the Behave class is an optional class. You do not have to come to it. It's open to everybody. It's not technically associated with this class, so don't feel like you have to. I'd love to see you. But it is optional. So, let's see. No agenda. Roster's going around. So then I think, unless I miss anything, well, how's everybody doing for one? How's been the last few weeks since the first class? Yeah? Have you had any, I don't know how to say this, but has this class come up for you in any way? Has there been any discussions, follow-up? Has anything resonated from the first day that you went and saw when you went back to work or anything like that? Any stories you want to share?
I got a question. What are the black fingers of death? I was reading the PowerPoint.
Oh, yeah.
But I didn't know what it was.
The black fingers of death is what is it, a bacteria that affects the root structure of cheatgrass. So it's a biological control agent for it. What's that? Botanist, right? Yeah. So I can't remember what does it affect? Does it affect the is it just the growth of it? Did you read any of that?
Seed development.
Is it seed development?
Yeah,
Oh,
I thought it was like the germination of it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, and I found another article recently on that, and I threw it up on the My Community page too. So there was some additional. And did you guys see somebody from Australia jumped on there? I was like, that was random. I guess we're talking. I guess it's open so everybody can see it. So we have some dude from Australia jumping in on us. Anyway, so yeah, that was the black fingers of death. It's just a biological control agent. Did that work out with the PowerPoints and the videos? Did you guys watch that? I don't know who else missed. Did that work out? So that's valid? Alright, someone tell me a story about how this related to you going back and doing a pile burn or talking to somebody. Anything at all?
I kind of did some legwork on the group project,
Okay.
but then kind of went nowhere to contact people. Just people are out of the office. And,
Tough time of year, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, do you feel like you started your process for it anymore?
Oh yeah, of course
Yeah.
I do. And I did look up some stuff on the internet, and I have a better idea of what to talk to them about. But I just not that much headway due to the whole time.
Yeah, I got you. This is a tough time. I almost kind of look at this class as before the holidays. That it's good that we're getting together and talking about a few things, but really everything really begins in earnest in January. What about the other group? Is there any other progress with the other two group projects? Anything?
I did a lot of kind of like the bigger picture of what we're gonna do, zooming it down, try to find background info. And it was taking pictures of the area and some of the old burns and what it looks like now and how we're gonna implement that. But I think some of our guys went on, Bernie guides did a business cancel to be able to kind of practice out the matrix
Yeah.
a little bit. We got some numbers with that, so that was really good and beneficial for our task that we have to do.
Yeah, it was good. I got a chance to witness that. So, was there a hand raised over here? Was that a Judge? Yeah, go ahead, go.
So we actually did the burn, and I got to meet some guys from the Matrix group. And before this class, I never knew them. They actually came over and explained it. I'm not part of their group, but it was nice to include and see what they're working on compared to
Thanks.
a little different from our project.
Yeah, and that's one of the cool things with this class is you get to meet some other people, right? All right, well, I'm always interested in hearing how things relate to you when you go back. So, any stories you have to share, just share them when the time comes up. So we'll get into the, I think we'll get into the reading assignment first. We'll talk about Aldo for a little bit. There's a little bit of information about Aldo himself behind me here. He was an interesting guy. He was one of the, there was other naturalist writers before him, Thoreau and Emerson and some other people like that. But the cool thing about Aldo Leopold is that he actually worked for the Forest Service, and he was an author. First of all, he was a good author. He could write to the popular media, he could write to normal people and they could understand. He worked in the Southwest very early in the Forest Service. One of the things that people like about Aldo, and I appreciate about him, is he didn't always concur with the U.S. Forest doctrine, right? So he didn't always agree with what he was seeing, with what the Forest Service was saying, and that's very apparent in this paper. I don't know if you guys picked up on that or not, but this is 1924. This is in the heyday, right, of the Forest Service. It's the 14 years after the big blow-up. The Forest Service was uniting as an agency, and even then, Aldo was saying, hey, not everything is right. We need to really think about these things. He was using some terminology that the rest of the Forest Service wasn't really using. He actually died on a fire of California, a cardiac arrest. He actually had a heart attack on a fire. Wisconsin helping his neighbor put out a fire, so he died on the fire line. A hero. And then he wrote this paper when he was out west. So you guys have the discussion questions? So let's go through this. I'm going to take a look over here. Oh, by the way, I forgot. So Ramona, this is our alternate location for meeting. I actually like this room a little bit better. It's a little bit bigger. It's a little more elbow room. And we may be meeting here more in the future. There's a restroom on either side over here. And then I'll give you guys 45 minutes to go into town if you need to for lunch. And there's also some other restrooms in the main building and some facilities over in the main building, the district office. This is just the training room. So, just wanted to go over that. So, you guys can read the top part, but let's see. Go through the first question. So, what are the parks that he describes that used to exist in the southern Arizona landscape? So, what did he mean by these parks? Who wants to take a stab at that? Don't avert your eyes. You want to take us out? Take us off, please.
Just the grasslands and savannas. It's just an ecosystem. It's the term park is it's just a historic word used by the Europeans. So over in Europe, they really groomed the lands to their specifications early on, and a groomed landscape, to them they called it park. So when they came out west and they started seeing this juxtaposition of a tree landscape morphing into a savanna that further morphed into a grassland, those big open pockets that would dot the mountainous landscapes, they just called them parks. That's all.
Did everybody understand that when they were reading this paper, how they meant exactly what she was saying? Real manicured, real easy to walk through. It's kind of a perception thing. And you're right about the European. I remember this. I remember from forestry school that they talked about the German foresters would actually walk through the forest and like pick up sticks off the ground to make it look more cleanly. You know, but that's the degree of management that they would have. So a little bit different than the Americans do. All right, thank you for answering that. All right, what were the changes or effects as a result of settlement? And here's the other thing, by the way. There's these questions, and when you guys get really comfortable with this class and talking and everything, I don't even care if we talk about these questions. I'm actually mostly interested in what you took from the paper. So if anybody just wants to talk about what they felt about that, I'd rather just toss it over my shoulder and have a discussion, honestly. But until that happens, I have the questions, so I'll do one more. And if anybody wants to just start talking about what they read, I would much appreciate that more than.
About it.
Brooke, thank you.
Okay, so the way
Wait,
when I was when I was reading it, it actually pertained to something that's in my life. My husband's family has a very large cattle ranch in Mexico, and so as I was reading, I was picking up on the changes within the grasslands and the vegetation taking over, and I asked him had they ever thought about burning it. Supposedly his dad had thought about it, but it never actually got accomplished in his life. So I told him that he needs to research this. So I gave him a homework assignment. I told him he needs to research this to better manage their land for the cattle that they're going to have on it, so that it keeps it more of a grassland, but not to convert it into a brush.
Yeah.
So it was useful for me. I was very interested in it.
That is cool. Are they seeing brush encroachment, or what are they seeing on the land there that makes you think that they need to burn it?
In the lower ranch,
Or
it's grassy with a bit of brush encroachment, and then up high, it's more of a pine tree, and I don't know what pine, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there's every pine. Really, that's pretty cool. Where's the ranch? Is it on the Baja side or the
It
main
is
side?
in Ensenada,
Yeah.
well, right outside of Ensenada.
Okay.
They have a 12,000 acre ranch there, and then they have a little bit in Totati, which is definitely just like the Cleveland National Forest.
Yeah.
So
Sounds like a field trip to me.
we have their passports.
I don't have one. Right on, that's pretty cool. Yeah, see, now that's real world applicability. So, to take that a little bit further, I mean, how would you relate that and what you've seen on that property, or what he's saying to this, just the lack of fire, the impact of grazing, and what about the erosion? Because he talked a lot about erosion in the paper too.
Right, they did. No, not that I know of. There's no erosion issue. However, what I was thinking is to research this stuff for him and his family, to research this stuff so it doesn't become an issue in the future, so they don't get all that brush encroachment down in the lower properties,
Yeah.
and if the erosion's not an issue. So it's not there yet, but if they know how to manage it better, then maybe it won't happen.
That's awesome. You know, grazing is one of those interesting things, because I think you can really do grazing right, and you can really do grazing wrong, and you can have some deleterious effects or some positive effects. I've seen some really cool examples, especially when I was working in the Great Basin, of really proper grazing and proper rotations, and you can actually increase species richness type of things like that. So, or you can really screw it up.
I think that's true of any management, though. I mean,
Yeah.
applied incorrectly and you really screwed up. 'Cause, yeah, I mean, like you, I've seen some really awesome results of grazing, usually following a lot of South African techniques. But then, yeah, you've got folks that graze it to dirt. And
What are the South Africans?
so they have really initially developed the whole concept of flash grazing. So let's say you had a 20,000 acre parcel, you would chunk it up into whatever size you felt, maybe 5,000, 10,000 acre parcels, whatever, and you would basically fence in your cattle, and it's called flash grazing, and what it is it's a small area that a lot of cattle are on, but you can let them hit it real hard at the start of the growing season, and then as soon as they've got the whole area mowed, move into a different area. And so that flash grazing, if it's, again, done at the right time, it can trigger the meristematic stem on the plant to shoot up new growth. So as long as you can get the cattle off on time, then those plants will come back just fine. And then if you put that on a nice rotational schedule, what you end up with is basically a mosaic. So when there used to be the mosaic burnings, this is a very similar idea. And actually, a lot of times grazing is used as a fire surrogate on landscapes. I know out in Colorado, there was quite a bit of bison rotational grazing and cattle rotational grazing that was done since, again, really similar to back here. It's very hard to get burn permits because of air quality issues and stuff like that. So done right, cattle are awesome for landscapes.
All right. So I do want to talk a little bit about the role of grass, because you talk about a lot of grass in this paper, right? So I want someone to make a stab at how they interpret the role of grass and brush, because that's really what this paper is all about, and fire in this. So who wants to make a stab at that?
I'll try it.
All right.
I didn't know grass was that important, to be honest. I don't know much about grazing and all that, but it definitely sounded like there was some big time overgrazing going on. And grass is pretty important from what Aldo was talking about, because it kind of almost put the brush in check for the most part from getting crazy and growing like it is now. Is the overgrazing, right? And then the erosion factor too, when the grass was gone, the brush wasn't doing the job as well as the grass was.
Okay.
So important, I guess.
Okay. So how does fire factor into that, Derek?
With the grass is the carrier. The thing just from working the fire side of things, always look at no rain, no grass crop off the road for us to carry to get our fires and our overtime. Kind of the same thing. That it wasn't just the root system, but the fire being introduced to the brush to keep it down, and then allowing the grass to grow. It had better competition with the brush, and I think that has a lot to do also with the change of elevational species there. Also, because he talks a lot about the burning of the junipers and the pine, and just not having that grass to carry fire through there and keep introducing it every 10 years to beat down the brush started affecting it elevationally also.
Right, so how is the brush going to respond to fire? You guys pick up on that?
Depends on the type, but
what about in this paper though?
It talked about some of those larger, really large ones, and actually the burn scars and how they were consistent, and then when the grass was gone, how that actual burn scar wasn't even really there, and it almost, I think it sounded like it died off almost because it wasn't maybe getting enough fire.
The brush?
Yeah.
Well,
the
that was,
larger
he's talking
ones.
about the juniper, right?
Juniper, yeah.
Yeah, and I think he was talking about different, help me if I'm wrong here, but wasn't he, there's the juniper species, which are, basically tree species, or woodland, is what he would call woodland species. And then brush would be species in between that, like sagebrush.
Okay.
I'm actually not sure what we talked about in this paper, what the brush species were. But, right, so you have the grass, and in normal, no grazing, what's happening? You have that grass that's there, it's consistent, you get a lightning ignition, and then the fire is burning through that grass, and the grass is the carrier. You remember him talking about that one part in the paper where he's talking about all the old skeletons of the junipers? And what was the deal with all the skeletons of the junipers?
stems are
Yeah.
still.
So they were still there, but what was in between them?
Some type of tree that couldn't resist fire. What was it? I don't know, some type of-
Oh, well, there was,
Talks
he
about-
was talking about the pines and the manzanitas
Yeah.
were more, were less resistant. But what he was saying was that he had all these stems of these juniper trees that had been killed by fire, probably a fire once. But in between there, what was missing in between the trees?
Grass.
What he called the what did he call it? The carrier? It was the grass, right? So he was seeing there was a difference. Let's see. And then how did he describe? What did he think the ecosystem looked like before grazing was introduced? Remember he talked about like on some of those like exposed rock outcrops.
Yeah, you can see all the animals, right? Or the deer. Right, it was more open, right? Like the.
He talked about that. Yeah, you're right. I was thinking about the plants, but yeah, what was he talking about with the animals?
That I guess when you're up on top, you can actually spot them. Versus now, there's so much brush everywhere, it's hard to find them.
The cattle. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, that's right. He said that the ranchers, the old ranchers. I love how he's like, oh, the old ranchers. And I've got a great old rancher story that I'm going to share with you guys later. It's in a session, but yeah. So the brush and the juniper and stuff had been encouraging. But
wild turkeys too at the end.
Right, and
But they were,
yeah, that's right.
couldn't really live in there.
But they were going the opposite, right? Because they needed open space.
Yeah, needed more open area.
But what about the exposed rocks? You're talking about like the boulders and all the like the little cliffs. Did you guys pick up on that?
So the places where the cattle couldn't get to graze.
Yeah. What were they seeing where the cattle were not?
Just small grass spots, even though there was barely any soil retention, there was still grass, and they're kind of like a sample of what they used to be like.
Yeah, it's like a little snapshot in time, right? I'm really impressed in this paper by like just the observations he was making. You know, it's stuff that's like, man, who does this anymore? Who has the time? We're all on our computers. So what were the species that he was seeing on those little like the little cliff edges where the cattle couldn't come? Do you remember? It was bunch grasses, right? Just sort of like native bunch grasses. Which is different than, say, these annual grasses which come in, which are more exotic and more of a fire problem. All right. What else? What else did someone take from this? Was there anything that really struck you? I mean, that's what I'm more interested in.
There was a statement that's made that the natives and the lightning thinned the brush.
Yeah, early in the paper. I think it's in like the first. Where was that?
It's the bottom of the page and then it goes to the top. Sorry.
Yeah. So what was the deal with the native Native American bird? What was he saying about it?
Previous to the settlement of the country, fires started by lightning and Indians kept their brush thin, kept the juniper and other woodland species decimated, and gave the grass the upper hand with respect to the possession of the soil.
Mm-hmm. So it was just reiterating that there's been management, whether you want to call it European or pre-European, for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got a question with that, because he hits the European model here a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
At this time, is the Forest Service still kind of having that mind frame? I know this is the big push of putting fires out and still during that era, but they still have no concept of using fire to benefit at this time. They still have like a European thought process.
I would say in 1924, and correct me if anybody wants to jump in on this, my understanding is at that time period, it was really still being debated. The Forest Service was pushing towards a fire suppression doctrine, but at that time, there were still people that had been around long enough that knew that fire on the landscape was something that was natural. Remember in the last class we talked about like the timber company owners? Because remember in the 1920s, this is really just the time period when these places are getting, where the forest reserves are being set up still all across the nation. A lot of them had been set up before that, but there were still people that were pushing for this alternative management. And my feeling is that in reading in the 1920s and into the 30s, especially with the CCCs that were available to them, that's really when, I guess you could say it went over the edge. It went over the cliff towards suppression, is once we had the depression and we had the workforce available. So, because 1924 was before that time period, there were still people that were still pushing for it. We're still trying to, look at the fact that fire is natural as a process on the ecosystem, that sort of thing. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we weren't done yet, but there was a lot of people in 24 within the Forest Service that really were pushing towards this. By then, you had the second or maybe even the third forest chief or Forest Service chiefs, and all the early Forest Service chiefs were definitely suppressionists, firefighters, or wanting to do suppression. That's a good question, Derek. Okay. So, anything else with this one? I don't know. Did you? Yeah, go ahead, CJ.
A couple years ago, I had a class in Tucson, and there was a big deal. I was on the news a couple times. The buffalo grass.
Yeah, yeah.
It's an invasive taking over that part of southern Arizona, and there's a big concern not only with the homes being threatened. So it's a fire-resistant ecosystem, but turning it into a very large fire ecosystem that not only threatens their homes, but also the ecosystem itself,
Right.
killing the desert. Basically, because it's so fire prevalent, it's grass.
Right, and it's big grass, right?
Pardon?
It's a big, isn't it
Yeah.
a large grass? Like
Yeah,
3
there
foot?
was one of our field trips was to one of the Sky Islands where the lemon fire or something, and
Okay.
it runs all the way up to the brush, and so there's those Sky Islands now are threatened by actually the valley floors, where they never were in the past.
Why? Why were they never there?
Because it was a desert. Desert ran up and then it was brush. So there's no way for really there's no way for the fire to burn either from the top down or from the bottom up.
Right.
It will only stay on the top. And now it could actually come from the bottom with a head of steam into the timber to get on that lemon fire
Right.
and actually burn up and over down into the next valley.
Right.
And they caught it in the grass.
So this concept of I don't know, continuity, I guess is what it is. But a carrier? And actually, we're gonna talk about this when it comes to fire regimes. And actually, I wonder if we use this. If we not, we'll use this as an example. But you're taking an ecosystem that never really experienced fire, and then you're inserting like an annual or semi-annual or perennial grass. It's perennial grass, I think. But anyway, this thing that never used to be there before and really loves to carry fire. It's absolutely devastating areas of the Southwest. It's a great example.
One of the big problems with the Southwest actually has been the overgrazing. What's actually not very well known is that the deserts are not as unproductive as we think they are. They actually were pretty robust grasslands. But when the Europeans came in and had done the massive grazing that they're used to, it allowed for a lot of introductions of non-native grasses, so much taller. They had a very different methodology for carrying and pushing fire. So fires actually were rather prevalent on desert landscapes, but when you look at arid and semi-arid areas, your fire return intervals are like 50 to 100 years. It's way, way out there. So really similar to us, deserts are seeing that transition of shorter fire returns happening, and then it in turn leads to a cascading ecosystem effect as well.
Yeah. Cool. That's perfect. That's a great segue because we're going to talk about some of those things today with fire return intervals and fire regimes and that sort of thing. So, all right. What else? Anything else about this paper? I'm happy to hear it. When I allocated until about 10 o'clock to talk about it, so I don't know if there's anything. Great. What do you got, Lorenzo?
I probably got a little bit more superficial. Just the tone. Just the
No,
way
it's
that-
okay, man.
The
Anything.
way that he talks in
Mhm.
the paper, very much man of the. It just seems like he knows the area. Also, kind of like a scientist in a way.
Right.
Trying to discover. It's very scientific the way that he's making this discussion, how he's thinking about it, how his approach is. But it's very. I was gonna say like I don't know. He's figuring it out using scientific method, but not really using scientific stuff.
Yeah. Was there a single statistic in this?
No.
Not really. No.
No.
All pretty anecdotal.
Actually, kind of back to what something that kind of I'm thinking about is that buffalo grass was planted by people to help out grazing and erosion, and it became obviously now it's a problem. And also, I know like the Forest Service has done this, and it's funny if we continue to do it. Is after the Dude Fire in Arizona, they planted love grass, which is only eaten by rhinoceroses in Africa. It's the only thing that will eat it. And now it's an invasive, and they have a problem with that. So I just find it's funny because we still did the same thing after the station fire in Angeles. They started planting, and it was a lot of politics involved with that, but they planted hundreds of thousands of non-native trees.
Right.
Yeah, the mortality rate was like 98%.
Right.
It's supposed to be like 50, but and in places where there was never trees. So it's kind of funny because we're still doing the same things.
Why do
today.
you think people do that? Why do you think
Politics. That was a lot of politics with carbon credit stuff.
Oh, to try to plant trees?
Yeah. People buying carbon credits and handing them trees to plant.
Yeah.
And it has fire scars, so they want to.
I think,
Who was first? Aaron?
Just that validation of him not having any, you know, he didn't really, but it was, you talked about earlier how he got word from the old ranchers that, you know, I don't know, that's validation right there, if you ask me. And they knew what it looked like before.
Right.
And he must have talked to them or
So
got it from them.
that's anecdotal evidence, right? Is anecdotal evidence valued these days, you think? No? Do you think no? Does anybody disagree?
It is to
Not
a
as much as
degree.
it should be.
I think it depends on who you talk to.
Yeah.
I mean, my personal belief is you cannot rely totally on what your computer tells you, but you also can't totally rely on what someone's personal story is.
Sure.
Because there's bias in both of those. So it's finding that nice mesh between the two of them.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
There is value, but applied, yeah, I think it's being eroded with time, but there is value, and I think some people, I think that's a great answer. It depends on who you talk to, yeah, for sure. Derek, you were going to say something?
yeah, just that, after going back east and seeing what they deal with and then hearing that. And my feeling is that fuels is still kind of in a theory. There's science behind a lot of it still, but it's still in like a theory philosophy phase where it's people, you know, introducing their idea, doing their idea, believing this will happen, and we're still a little behind the curve in that area. And but that's what makes it interesting, that somebody just has this idea and then we go do it. I'm not sure how much background went into it before they planted those grasses. I'm guessing maybe it grew fast and that was one of their ideas behind it. Well, let's fix this landscape quick, so we'll put this grass without fully knowing that only the rhinos in South Africa are going to eat it, so we're going to have a fire problem in 10, 15 years.
Does it surprise you that that managers are still making decisions like that?
Quick to act, knee-jerk reactions, yeah.
It's almost like we're managing.
Over-managing?
Yes.
What do you mean by that? Is it?
Well, the idea of a grassland was simple to the Native Americans that live, or when he talks about the terraces.
Yes. Yes, the terraces,
You know,
yeah.
that was simple. They wanted grasslands, they burned it.
Yeah.
You know, and now I know I've been on the district for a while, and trying to type convert Palomar Divide has been a non-ending project.
It has. We've been type converting it for 50 years now.
Yeah, so, I mean, you know, is it overmanaged? Are we overthinking it?
Or are we fighting a losing battle?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Who's smarter here? Is it humans or is it nature?
Is it
I
humans
mean-
versus nature?
I mean, think about type conversion. So we're trying to take just a strip of landscape and, you know, type convert it to, let's say, a grassland, but on both sides of it, you have shrubland. The only way you're gonna successfully get type conversion is by constantly doing work on it. We will never successfully have type conversion until we do the entire landscape. I mean, it's just the nature of vegetative responses, in my opinion.
Yeah, sure. I think we should pave our field break.
Yeah.
Why not? You can drive on it, stop a fire. It's never going to go anywhere. It's a little roundup.
Paint it green?
Now paint it like red and white. It would meet the. What's the difference though? Wouldn't it meet the objective if we paved our field break?
Yeah. Avoid
We're managing.
But then again, nature would still erode that.
With time, and we'll just chip seal it every 10 years. But it's your point though, Jim, is valid, which is that no matter what we do, we're always sort of pushing the rope, right? Yeah. So what's easier, to do something as draconian as paving it, or just managing it every 5 to 7 years and burning it? We're trying to meet an objective, right? Yeah.
And the thing there is, you know, one of the groups is looking at monitoring. Well, if you look at part of the fuel break we've been working on, part of it's kind of successful in chunks. It's a lot grassier, slower regrowth of the brush in it. So, you know, it's still a learning process. I don't know if we burned out hot or cool or what we did there. We did something was different.
Could be soil conditions.
Soil,
Could be
yeah.
that they dumped a shitload of herbicide on it 40 years ago.
What
Still places in
what
Stove
section?
Canyon.
What section?
Just going up the divide in parts, you hit your areas where it's been good and stayed kind of grassy, and then you hit where it's, you know, the brush is really coming quicker.
Is that a section where like maybe mastication has been done and then burned?
I'm not sure because I haven't seen that.
I'm not sure. We'll take a look at it.
I was just curious. That's my big thing lately.
There are areas though like that though, like you're doing Laguna Marina, right? So if you go up Scope Canyon, which is that canyon, or not go up it, but when you go up Sunrise Highway, when you got Scope Canyon off to your left when you're going up Sunrise, you guys ever notice all those patches? All those, what I was told is that all that was herbicide application done back in the 70s. That stuff has not been treated and it's still there.
Yeah, well,
So you see that out there on the landscape. Some long-term solutions.
Queen Mac is an example
Tag on
of that too.
Yeah, it is. Go ahead, Jose.
Tag on to what Jim just mentioned. Some of those units that we burned they were masticated, or one year we brought in that brush crusher.
Okay. The roller crusher.
Yeah, the field type didn't really change. It just, I don't know that we were as effective as we thought we were. I know that on the North Slope side, above Oak Grove there, a lot of that stuff just got flooded with poodle dog brush for 4 or 5 years, and then the brush just came above the poodle dog brush, but the grass really never came back.
Right. Yeah. I don't know an explanation for it. I do know that poodle dog brush stuff is native. Everyone talks about that a lot. But yeah, I think it's kind of a fire follower. So
I've noticed it has to be extremely hot for the poodle dog brush to grow.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in areas where it's burned extremely hot. That's why I've been watching the mastication, and in a grass field that you burn, it really doesn't grow back. But if something's like, you take that, surface of volume, you crush it, and then you introduce the fire and it bakes on that soil and it nukes it, the seed bank is there, and then all of a sudden the poodle dog brush comes up in a hotter environment, in a hotter fuel burning environment.
do you know why that probably would be? Can you think of why that
Well, I'm thinking because we're taking so much fuel instead of having it standing, and we're crushing it and laying it perfectly blanketed on the ground and burning it that way. It's still thicker. It's still more than the 1,000-hour fuel. So it's burning longer. It's burning hotter. It's sterilizing that soil. It's getting farther down where the poodle dog brush is. That bulk of that brush is, the root system is down 6 inches. So to spark that seed to pop, it's got to be deep, almost like a duff layer. But once, so it's two things. The poodle dog brush grows where there's no shaded fuel break. So if you take the tree layer away, it'll grow. If there's shade, it won't grow. It has to be in a sunny environment for it to grow. So the heat to nuke the soil enough to pop the seed, and then having no ladder fuel above it, it grows no problem. If there's a ladder, it won't grow. It needs the sun to sustain it.
So when's chaparral supposed to burn? When's chaparral supposed to burn? Summer, right? When you get very hot fires, right? And then what's the soil conditions in the summer? Dry. Well, what are the soil conditions when we mostly burn our fuel rigs? Wet. So the only thing I would say is probably I would counter to what you said was sterilization of the soil. I don't think you can really sterilize these soils, but you can burn them hot, right? So it's just because they're so thin.
But I think it's enough that it won't let the grass grow back. It's enough cooking off the top layer of where the grass, that root system grows.
I see what you're saying, getting deep. But what I'm saying is I think it simulates, and I'm agreeing with you, is that I think it simulates when you have a lot more fuel bed and you're burning it in the times you're getting enough of a heat pulse to reach the temperatures that you need to be able to stimulate those seeds, much like a summertime fire. So you have to, and we're going to talk a lot about this today. We're going to talk about fire regimes, proper ecosystem functioning, that sort of thing, so that's perfect. Those are the kind of observations that you need to make. And then you need to take it and think about why is it happening, right? And so hopefully your knowledge that you're gaining with this will help you make those determinations. So, all right. So this is a great discussion. This is the kind of discussion I love to have. It took you guys about 20 minutes to get there, but once we got there, it was really good. So think about this in the future. Again, I'm happy to throw these questions out, but this is your time to have conversations like this that are just kind of random for us to talk about. And we have discussions during the class period too. But this is great. This is a good conversation. But I'm gonna move on at this point. So before I jump into the lecture, you guys need like a 5-minute break. I know you guys travel and everything. Just want to take like a real quick 5-minute one, and then we'll jump into lecture until about 11:30. Thank you, guys.
A little bit up. Overloaded. My brain. My brain's
Something bad.
Oh, yeah. It's been a while. As soon as I walked in, I was like, I'm like, wow, we finally upgraded. And the chairs are definitely the cushion. It's size.
No. I'll tell you what, another thing I lost along the way is your pre-work. It was good. I read it. You passed. I'll probably end up handing it out later. Yeah, I don't know why I do that. I actually feel bad handing out those reading questions before you do your post.
This changed the article though.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a different one. That one was just on the other page.
Is yours the everybody? Score. Yeah, because they did the aggregate one, right, which was Purdue, Angeles, and up here, and then they dropped off.
They did some initial analyses with us.
Yeah, and then they saw the oh, okay, you know what, I did look close enough on these people.
Have fun there, man.
Good job. Team.
Yeah.
So we don't want you to read the whole thing, we'll read the LP one. Alright, sometimes it just works out. What's that? Oh yeah, it's the same research, yeah. They just, well, you know, these guys, especially these Keeley's things, if it's one paper, they'll make it into like 8 papers.
Yeah.
I see that constantly, it drives me crazy. Anyway. Alright. Hey Maria, we go round up the kids. Boys and girls out there, please.
So they have watches this year.
5 means 5. Because I'm such a hard ass, I'm sure they'll really respect that.
I think you just have to shout.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, tone it out, yeah. I tweaked it out.
I know, I haven't
He's
been here
going
long
so
enough.
the latest is he's gonna go back and scan.
I seriously, I've driven that theory to take it out. I really want to get started. Hey! Everybody's doing like all the time.
Yeah, because he
They tune it out.
oh no. Yeah, he used to be that.
Okay, there should be, if I did this correctly, student agendas going around now, so now you will know what your life is going to look like for a little while. Yay! We're going to have a lecture, we're going to have lunch, 12:15. Lisa's going to give her student presentation. What's that going to run, about an hour?
I hope not.
I hope not either.
I was just doing it dry run last night.
45? Alright, I'll try to hurry.
I'll try and keep it shorter though. I guess it's just gonna depend on if.
Yeah, well, I'll try to go through my presentation and give you the time to do it. But yeah, we are shooting for about 20 minutes in general for that. But you know, same time, if it's good, it's good. I'm cool with that. We'll work on
Or
that.
you can say if it's bad, you can leave the stage.
Probably not going to do that. All right, everybody good? You ready for some lecture? Do we need to bring the lights down or anything? No? You sure? I feel like we should bring the front lights down. Give me some ambience here. Hold on, that's better. You have to admit that's better. It's not. All right, so today we're going to talk about fire and ecosystems. This isn't really going to be directly, I guess, fuels related per se in a practical manner, but what this lecture is about teaching you guys about how fire interacts with the ecosystems, how the ecosystems interact with fire, what it looks like when there's too much fire, when there's not enough fire, and what I really want for you guys to be able to do at the end of this lecture and at the end of this class and just in general in life is be able to look at a landscape, look at the vegetation, and understand, you know, what happens with fire in that. Is fire a part of that ecosystem? Is fire not supposed to be a part of an ecosystem? And to what extent is fire supposed to be a part of that ecosystem? Be able to look at a landscape and say, if there's a fire now, what would happen now? Which we do all the time, right? Just from a suppression standpoint or a fuel standpoint, we're doing prescribed fire. But really, you know, what's it going to look like now? What's it going to look like next year? You know, what are the effects going to be? What's it going to look like? Is there going to be erosion? Is there going to be, you know, what's the impact to a wildlife habitat? all those sort of functioning things. This is what this lecture is about, but that's really what I want to get you guys to be. Start thinking about it a little deeper instead of just, what we do a lot of times with fighters especially is, all we train them to do is go and put out the fire and not really think about the fire. And then, you look at the black spot and, you have conversations and you guys are all smart and you look at what happens with time. But hopefully what this lecture will do is give you a little bit of the language that you can start, maybe if you want to read research or if you want to talk about it with other people and have those conversations. Does that make sense? Because, fire is it's a big part of a lot of the Western ecosystems. And the more you understand it, the better. And not just in prescribed fire and fuels, but just in fire management in general. So again, Unit 2, Fire and Ecosystems. The objectives, we're going to talk, I might be overstating this in the objectives, but we are going to talk about the difference between a fire regime and a condition class. At the end of today, I want you to understand what a fire regime is, why we have fire regimes, and hopefully understand a little bit about fire regimes. And then tomorrow at Palomar, by the way, we're going to look at some data and some sheets, and we're going to go out to Palomar and we're going to talk about fire regimes and condition classes and interactions. And like Will was talking about, the interaction with the chaparral up to the Sky Island forest, what it really looks like, where it's working, where it isn't, that sort of thing. We're going to talk about the role that fire regime and condition class has in fuels management, because we do manage to it. And then also talk a little bit about how to identify fire regimes and condition classes. And we're going to talk about some other things in this lecture too. So I just want to start off with something that I know you guys have all heard about, right, which is an ecosystem. But if you've never been actually exposed to the actual definition of an ecosystem and what makes up an ecosystem, then this is your opportunity, I guess, to see that. So I don't like to read off the slides unless you guys know that, but definition time here. A definition of an ecosystem is the environment in which living organisms and non-living organisms, or non-living components rather, interact. What would be like non-living components in an ecosystem? Rocks, yeah. Soil, water, all those things that are not alive, right? And they do affect things, right? Like how do rocks affect the ecosystem? Stuff can't grow there. So it might be a physical barrier. That's for one. What else about rocks?
Habitat.
Habitat, might be a habitat. Yeah, exactly. So it creates a space for existing.
Prevent erosion.
What's that?
Prevent erosion.
Prevent erosion. Yeah, it could definitely create barriers for that. Where do the minerals and soils come from? Yeah, a lot of it comes from rocks, right? So rocks are not just something that exists in the ecosystem. They get broken down, they get ground up, it floods down to the river, creates siltation. It's beaches, right? Our beaches are our mountains, like a million years ago or whatever. Well, not anymore because there's reservoirs. But all that rock had to come from somewhere. I'm not trying to just talk about rocks, but somebody brought that up, and that's just a good example to think about. Everything has a role in there. It has a role in it. And then anyway, an ecosystem is just the place in which all this stuff comes together. How does a grass use an exposed rock? Like Elder Leopold was talking about, you creates like a little cliff, well, a little bunch grass, like a little dirt can accumulate over time, then a seed can grow there, and then you have just a little micro ecosystem there. So anyway, the definition of ecology is the study of living organisms and the relationships that they have with their environment. So, it talks about living organisms, but really ecology talks about all of it, the living and the non-living components of it. And there's a lot of different types of ecology that people can talk about. There's ecologists, which are just straight up ecologists, they look at everything. But then there's all kinds of different specific types of ecologists. You might have a wildlife ecologist, right? When all they really are looking at is how the wildlife interact in the ecosystem. Or what else we got? Plant ecologists. We have fire ecologists. What do you think fire ecologists are interested in? Right? Fire regimes, how fires affect things, how they affect the plants, animals, and all that sort of thing. And hopefully, actually, so we have an ecologist actually with us now that I think about it. What would you consider yourself? What do you call it? Are you a fire ecologist?
Yeah, I'm technically a fire ecologist.
Okay, so I like to use the local expertise. Do you have anything to add to this slide?
As far as like what
I don't know,
do
whatever.
as fire
Yeah, sure.
ecology? No, I feel like I'm the gap between the fire program and the ecology program. And so I kind of bridge that gap, and I explain to fire personnel like why the wildlife biologist is interested in us not burning during a limited operating period, or why the wildlife biologist really wants us to burn in an aspen stand, and how us putting fire back on the landscape is important to all these other things besides just lighting things on fire.
Right. And the way you do that is you have an understanding of both sides, right?
I try to.
Yeah. Well, don't we all?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. I thought you were going to say why the biologist is crying.
No, I hammer our ecologists pretty hard, our botanists, like why we need fire out here with the wildlife biologist, why it's going to be improved elk habitat if we get into that aspen stand.
Yeah, absolutely cool. Well, help me out here with these slides too. So, and I want to take a definition a little bit further. So fire, right? So fire is just one component of an ecosystem. There's all kinds of components to an ecosystem. There's rain, erosion, whatever, throw it out there. And then there's fire. We talked about in the last lecture that fire is seen as a disturbance, and I think there's still a lot of people that see fire as a disturbance. And it functions as a disturbance clearly. But to take it one step further now, in talking with a lot of the fire ecologists and the readings, I think what they want us to look at it now is they want to see fire as a process. Okay, so let's talk about the difference, or does anybody want to try to explain what that means to them, the difference between a disturbance and a process? Fire as a disturbance versus fire as a process in the ecosystem. Inherent to the ecosystem, right? So of the ecosystem. Anybody want to make a stab at that one?
Well, the way I see it, go ahead. Is it's not a disturbance, it is a process to keep those vegetation types that depend on fire to continue to grow. So it's not actually disturbing them, but helping it.
Right, because a disturbance is almost viewed as something negative in a way, right? And disturbing the trajectory. I think that's a good way of putting it. I look at it as kind of, you're going straight and a disturbance maybe makes a left, right? But I think what they want us to look at is, we're going forward, we have a fire, but we're still going forward. It's just a process.
I guess I should say the fire-dependent ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Well, sure, yeah. But there can be fire in any kind of ecosystem, right? Yeah. But it would be a process in a fire. Yeah. Okay, I got what you're saying. Absolutely. Yeah, okay. Go ahead, Robert.
The way I see it is, it's always been a process. We humans called it a disturbance for lack of understanding, but now we're back understanding that it's a process.
Yeah, that's very well said. Yeah, I like that actually. Yeah, it's all about perspective, right? I think we brought up perspective in the last class, and I think we bring up perspective a lot. Yeah, it is very much perspective. It's kind of funny, right? When you're talking about, I'll come to you, Susie. I lost my train of thought with that. I think Derek, you were kind of talking about the science and like how we approach things, right? And it's all about how we look at it. Yeah, I lost it. Doesn't matter. Susie, go ahead.
Well, I just think that, like, especially in our area, like, say, California as opposed to, say, New York and then the middle of the country, is we have a lot of media coverage that plays on certain things for money, I guess. But
politics, right?
You know, when you're seeing on TV, you're ripping fire that takes out 40 houses because of Santa Ana winds or something, you know. The public gets to see that part, and they don't really have the time like we may be here discovering the process and being able to educate or with the media show people this is how it could be. So I think that is a huge factor.
Yeah.
Disturbance-wise as opposed to processing. But I think that I found, like, the more people that are in, say, educational programs, they seem to dive into the process a lot better than people who are just looking at it saying, my house is about to burn and blah, blah, blah.
Because they're coming at it from the point of view of
fear.
You have a lot to lose and fear, right? Yeah, no, I can see that for sure. So you're saying, is it that it's younger people that you're talking to in educational programs, or is it just because they don't have that sort of drama of a fire right behind them?
Well, it could be younger. I know that there's a lot more people that seem to put emphasis on education as opposed to 40 years ago where we were probably more spaced out more, not so many urban-based things going on. But I think media is huge because it is an education tool, and that's what they're being educated by. If they don't take the time to dive into what what is prescribed fire, why it helps us, and how can we implement it in our community kind of gig. But I think that politically, it's kind of driven that way now anyway. Where they're, like with fire safe councils and stuff, they're trying to reach that people group that have houses and stuff, where it's affecting them directly.
Yeah, to get them to understand sort of the environment in which they work. I like a couple things that you said in there, politics and the media, and you're absolutely right about the media, right? We all agree that most people are spouting back what the media is told them. I know there's a lot of efforts with some of the groups I'm involved in at the regional level that they're really looking at media. They want to create these little short videos, and there's a lot of interest in creating these little videos, and they're hoping people are going to partake of them to kind of change the paradigm of what we have now. So yeah, politics and media always drive things. So that's one thing we need to get better at dealing with. So anyway, what do you think about this process versus disturbance?
I think I look at fire as a process, as I think I should in my current profession. But understanding that, you know, it's not just the fire, but the effects of fire. Like even smoke has an effect on an ecological process. You know, like smoke kills mistletoe, and a lot of people don't know that.
Right.
Because they just see mistletoe as some sort of invasive species. But if you plants respond better to the smoke process and the process of putting those nutrients back into the soils. Yeah, I think what fire does is beautiful.
It's inherent, right? It's part of the ecosystem. And you're right, fire is not just the heat and the flames. It's the smoke that goes into the air and kills the mistletoe, or it's breaking down carbon and releasing nitrogen and creating things available, and it creates space for sunlight to come in so that seeds can germinate. And none of these things can happen without the fire and the effects of the fire. So I do want to say I struggle with this class because I set up this whole fuels curriculum with, and I mentioned this in the very beginning, with the notion that I wouldn't duplicate anything you're going to get somewhere else. I think you guys know, or I might have mentioned that I'm the lead instructor for the RX 310, which is the Introduction to Fire Effects class. It'd be very easy for me to talk a lot about fire effects in this class, but because conceivably at some point in your career you're going to get it, I try to stay away from that. But fire effects are so important, and we're going to talk about it invariably. But what Sarah just brought up was talking about literally the fire effects, what fire does on the landscape. So we can continue to talk about this, but fire is a trigger and part of a process. Again, inherent to the ecosystem. So we'll dive into this. Those are some great comments, guys. So this is an aside a little bit. Why is fire so much studied? Why do you think fire is such a vastly studied subject? And if you look into the research, you guys will see there are like millions of papers about fire. Why do you think that is?
I think the bare bones of it is because it's sexy. It elicits a natural visceral response by people. No, I mean,
I absolutely 100% agree with you. I would say it's very dramatic. So
yeah, it's really dramatic. Sorry, I have this argument about, wildlife versus botany, and everyone loves the wildlife because it's sexy. It draws human attention so much more than plants do. So I think, fire does that. When a tornado rips through Iowa, we're drawn to the TV because it's sexy. It captures our little pea brains. Ooh, something really exciting for these 3 seconds, and then we move on to go find the next sexy thing. So
I think it's polarizing.
Taps into the lizard brain. It's polarizing?
Yeah, it can be destructive. So
Yeah.
because of that, we give it so much attention.
It's dichotomous, isn't it? Yes. You think? Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, I like that too, actually. What you got?
I think it's because it's unpredictable, and we fully don't understand it. We humans, if we don't understand something, we'll keep studying until we get it. And I don't think it's gonna happen.
Well, it's job security, right? You're right.
Well, it's always been with us. Even before there was fire, man always had fire. It's been part of humankind since their existence.
We are who we are because of fire, right? Yeah, if you read some of the Stephen Pine stuff, he really talks about, like, the only reason we exist, right, is because of fire. Man captured fire, and we're able to heat ourselves and live and survive, and there's a direct correlation between our mastery of fire and our, whatever you want to call us now. Fire is important. And another thing I like about the Stephen Pine stuff he talks a lot about is, internal combustion. We captured fire, we mastered fire, we put it into a machine, and now we can fly across the oceans and that sort of thing. That's fire that's doing that. Ultimately, if you look at how much of what's around you and what is driven by fire, it's very inherent to us. Not only is it inherent to the ecosystem, it's inherent to us as a species. So, yeah, and it's also super sexy.
I think the whole point above is exactly why we study it, because it is seen as a disturbance and also a process, just like the analogy of like engineers and designers or architects. One side likes the beauty of it, the other one wants the function of it, but they have to work together in order for it to work with everybody.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons why it's so studied, because each side wants their bit of it.
Right, people relate, a lot of different people relate to it and are affected by it.
In different ways.
In different ways, yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And then, was it CJ or Jim, or?
No, I'm good. That was pretty good. I'll leave it.
You gonna leave it with Scott? All right, perfect. Thank you. All right. So anyway, where we're at now, I think most people can agree is that we're really looking at what's called. There's lots of different names for this. Ecological functioning. So we as a society and we as a Forest Service and land managers, what we're really interested in now is we want to try to get to ecological functioning with fire. We want, or at least we have this idea that we're someday going to be able to get to a point where fire exists on the landscape in the way that it's supposed to be functioning, right? But do you remember the restoration discussions that we had last time about remember we're asking ourselves, how should fire be existing on the landscape? What can we live with as a species in a society? So we'll be struggling with this concept of ecological functioning. Some people just want it to exist out in the back 40, way down deep in the wilderness areas. There's some people that want ecological functioning in our backyards, literally in San Diego County and beyond. They think that we can just harden our structures, right, and just let fire be what it is. Kind of look at communities as rocks in the ocean. I don't know if that's ever going to be the case. So, all right, ecosystem. So this is a diagram of an ecosystem. I kind of struggle explaining this. The big, what is this, red circle, brown, whatever color the big circle is, it's the ecosystem. And what do you have in here? Let's break it down. You have solar radiation, so sunlight is coming in, right? Sunlight is all the energy that everybody uses. Everything that's ever existed is solar radiation. Disturbances, this is an older one, whatever, we'll just live with this. And I like the fact that you're laughing at it now. I like it. It's a process. It's a process. Rookie, you have to X that off. Moisture, so you got water inputs. What do we have down here? Minerals, right? Rocks, soil organisms, and then a small. So that's the big ecosystem, right? And then on a smaller scale, you have habitat. What's habitat? Wildlife. Wildlife and where the wildlife live, right? So the wildlife is one thing, but the habitat is like the house of the wildlife, right? It's the tree, it's the snag, it's the whatever. In this case, I guess you got a little rock and a pond, and these little birds are living in this is their habitat. And then you have a plant community, so you're going even smaller in focus. So what's a plant community?
All the plants within that.
The plants. More than just the plants, though, right? No plants and no man is an island. So anyway, bring it back. So plant community. What is a plant community? What do you think?
Same type of plant.
Yeah, it's going to be the same general type of plant. The scale of that is going to be variable, but they're all existing together. You hardly ever see just like one type of plant existing in the middle of nowhere. Aren't there? If there's one type of tree, aren't they usually all around each other? And there's a bunch, and all those sort of fit in together into a larger ecosystem. So maybe California is an ecosystem. I don't know. That might be a little big, but whatever. We'll go with it. And then you have, that whole oak band that's on the foothills above the valley, and then you have up higher. You get into like Jeffrey Pine habitat community types or plant community types. Whatever. I could go on and forever and ever with that. But this just kind of shows that you can look big, you can look small, and that you should do that, right? So you should look at Palomar Mountain, but then you should look at small little areas, or you go to Laguna, or you go to your own forest. On the San Jacinto, it's different on one side than it is in the other, even of just the valleys. And so try to figure out why. Okay, and I really hate this. I don't know why I keep this in this presentation. So we're not going to spend a lot of time with this, but These big boxes are just kind of like the main things that make up the ecosystem, but I kind of like it. You got people, animals, which they're the same thing, but anyway, people, animals, trees, understory plants, forest, floor, soil. And then all this is trying to say, I mean, I think you guys get the message here, right? What's it trying to say?
They're all together.
They're all together, right? Life is a circle, right?
Why are we eating maple syrup straight up?
Dude. Where?
Are we Canadian?
People.
On the top left.
You don't like syrup?
I'm American.
That's right. America, we eat maple syrup straight out of the trees. Cut it and drink it right from it. Like a vampire, what? Have you ever been to a maple tree farm? It's pretty cool. Animals eating plants, it should be. No, not trees eating animals, that doesn't work that way. Plants are going, anyway, yeah, it's all things. You got animals dying, goes back to the forest floor, you get nutrients, goes down into the soil, you get roots taking it up. Yeah, life's a circle. Alright. Probably a song there somewhere. Okay, everybody good so far? So that's an ecosystem. So all the time we're going to talk about ecosystems, but we can talk about it more in the future. Fire regimes. So now we're going to start talking about fire regimes. What is a fire regime? So a fire. I hate to read this. I'm not going to read this. I'm going to refuse to let myself read this. A fire regime is a way for us to be able to talk about fire on the landscape. It's a way for us to be able to talk about fire and how it interacts with, the trees, well, not the trees, but the fuels, and you can also talk, well, I was going to say it gets into the, the variable inputs like the weather and that sort of thing. It's really just a way for us to be able to talk about fire and how fire should exist. So for instance, if you wanted to say, we have this ideal, right, of what a fire should exist on the landscape, how often a fire should be there, what the effects of that fire would be. We also didn't know this inherently. It's really just a way of, categorizing it in a way for us to have a common language. I guess that's what it comes down to. It's a way for us to have a common language to talk about fire on the landscape. And you're right, and to categorize the processes that occur in it. But the problem with the fire regime is that, and this is important, is that, and I always try to state this, is that nature is so freaking complicated, right? Can we all agree that nature is complicated? It's really hard to categorize anything in nature. It's really hard to put nature into a list and expect for it to exist in that list and not deviate in any sort of way. There's always going to be exceptions, there's always going to be caveats and outliers and that sort of thing. But what we can do is we can try to get close. It's a marker to I do like this, it's a marker to reference. It's a way for us to say, well, we think it should be this, and these are some general attributes that are associated with this particular fire regime, and this particular fire regime should exist on this landscape. So what if it doesn't exist on that landscape? What does that tell you? So if a fire regime should be a certain way on a landscape because whoever, the scientific gods have said that it should be that way, but we know after studying it that it isn't that way, what does that tell us?
That we are departed from the fire regime.
That we're departed from it, that's right. And it gives us something to
Get back to.
a goal to work. It gives you a goal, it gives you a target, exactly. So it's simply just a way to talk about it. Let's see. Does everybody follow that? We're going to talk about it some more. And we're going to break it down. So so the first person to really take a run at this was this guy named Bruce Kilgore in '81. He's the one that first really sort of looked at this issue. And what he did is he determined what we call fire regime factors, or factors that go into fire regimes. Again, these are all things that... What's up, Abram? Okay. Are you going to be around?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about it. Did you go up on Palomar yesterday or the day before?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. Abram Garcia is a graduate of this class. And a damn fine gentleman. All right, see you. Anyway, so Kilgore determined these things that go into a fire regime, and to this day, these are the main things that go into a fire regime. And you can break it up, and we're going to talk a lot about this today. So first one, fire frequency. Anybody know what fire frequency is?
How often it occurs.
How often it occurs. It's not rocket science. Fire intensity. You guys know what intensity is? Intensity. We talked about this a little bit, I think, on the last session. What's fire intensity? How hot it burns. Yeah, intensity really is just the heat input. It's different than severity. We're going to talk about fire severity. Intensity is different than severity. Seasonality. Don't make me ask you. I'm going to ask you.
When do typically the fires occur?
Yeah, when does it occur? Yeah, exactly. When does it typically occur, or characteristically occur, which is the term we're using, versus maybe what it is now. Burn pattern, which is the type of fire, and then burn severity, which is the magnitude of the effect. So Kilgore, all he did in his papers is he determined, looked at all the things that you see in a fire. So when you see a fire, we're like, how often has a fire occurred? What are the effects of it, et cetera, et cetera. And then Heinzelman came up with the first categorization. So he basically took this, he took some other papers as well, and he came up with the first fire regime categorization. So why is it important? I think we talked about this a little bit. Actually, I kind of jumped the gun on here. All right, so I asked, why is the fire regime and the factors that go into it important? I like to bring up the Sun Tzu principles. You know your enemy, right? If you want to look at fire as an enemy, but that's the Sun Tzu principle. So what do I mean by that? Know your enemy. Or what did Sun Tzu mean by that? And how do we apply that to fire regimes?
Know your enemy's
So-
weaknesses.
What's that?
Know your enemy's weaknesses.
Know your weaknesses? I agree with that.
Seasonal, when is it going to be around? When are you going to find it? Depending on all our workforce during that time.
Okay, so how to manage for it? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Okay. Robert?
How he reacts to our tactics and procedures.
Yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah, exactly. How it's going to react to it. What else? Anything?
Just like its MO, like what it usually does, so then you can factor that in.
How you can control it favorably, or say, oh, it's too intense now, we're gonna go extend it. Fire protection, that issue. So a degree of control,
Okay. How to control it?
yeah.
Right. And you have to understand about it. Anybody watch G.I. Joe in the 80s? Or is it just me?
Knowing's half the battle.
Or are you guys born in the 80s? What's that?
Knowing's half the battle.
Knowing is half the battle. That's the Sun Tzu principle of know your enemy. You need to know, if you're going to go out and have the hubris to go out and and to try to manage these landscapes, you have to know what you're doing, right? Because otherwise you'll plant some stupid plant that only rhinoceroses eat. And I don't know who made that decision, if that was ecologically valid or not, but you really got to wonder why as late as 1995 a decision like that is going to be occurring. That's personally what I believe in, and it's what I want you guys to believe in as well, which is that if you're going to go and you're going to cut a plant or burn a plant or whatever we do, please know, or at least have an idea what the effect of that is going to be. I would have to say, and I would have to agree, that a lot of fuels management work especially has been implemented by people that didn't really know what the effects were going to be. Most of the time it works out, but if you just tweak things a little bit, maybe look at seasonality, look at soil moisture, or whatever, you might get a more positive effect and maybe a more long-lasting one. So this is my favorite Sun Tzu principle, know your enemy, know what you're doing, and know how to make it work. And then, of course, as we talked about, you need to know what the natural conditions are. And by the way, you guys are never allowed to use the word natural again. Have I said that already? Okay. So everyone say natural right now. Natural. That's the last time. So I didn't hear you say it. Are you holding out?
You're saving it?
I'm going to make you write it 100 times on the board. So natural is the dumbest word ever. So you have to know what the natural condition is. What term we use now is characteristic. That's from Neil Sugihara. Hopefully Neil will be coming and attending this class in the future. He has, and he's the editor of that Fire in California Ecosystems book. And anyway, so no longer say natural, just natural. We don't know what natural is. Now we just think characteristic. Anyway, so it's a target for restoration, which is also a word. I will allow you to use the word restoration because our leaders are using the term restoration. But what are we restoring it to, right? Do we need to have this conversation again? We don't know what we're supposed to be restoring it to. We don't know what the climate change effects are going to be. We get freaking buffalo grass growing in, and just cheap grass, and these things are changing. So, please.
I think we're just slowing. I think we're just trying to, now we're never going to get it back to its original state.
Right.
So we're just trying to slow the decay of.
We're trying to stop the bleeding?
Yeah, that's really what I feel is it is now.
That's not a very positive outlook.
No, but you said it. You can't originally take it back to its original state. No way it'll ever happen. You're never going to put oaks back on Palomar and get rid of all the pines. So what I think a lot of the past studies have been is I'm going to take what I know because I'm from the north and there's pines, and I'm going to bring pines down here and plant them, and they're going to grow, and then we're going to have a forest again. And so that's just, it's not ever going to go back to, I was holding out to the natural state, or what we believe to be the common thing.
Right.
Yeah, because everything has a lifespan, right? Like, we can't make you a baby again.
You can cry, so there won't be a baby.
So there's different stages in that process. So, like you said, we don't know what to restore it to. Maybe that's our problem. We're always trying to restore something. But
Restoration's
I'm not going to use natural.
Restoration's not necessarily a bad term, though. It's one of those nice little pretty words that you can throw up there. The importance is how it's applied. So when you're coming up with a restoration plan for a very specific area, that's your opportunity to identify, okay, what is my end state? What do I want it to get to? So, yeah.
Yes, I agree with that. So you could not make me a baby, but you could give me a lobotomy and make me babble and make me vulnerable and approximate something that existed before that might not exactly look like it, but it approximates it, right? So aren't we pretty much doing that? Aren't we sort of approximating?
Yeah.
What's that?
But it's changed so much with people. We're finally being a little less selfish about just doing it for us and looking at, well, now it's still out of selfishness. We realize that we need certain things to be restored slightly, but with the amount of people we have now, it's just not possible to go back to natural. We need to find something that, whatever it was, but there needs to be a balance. We have to get better at finding that balance of our encroachment and getting what kind of ecology or ecosystem we need to survive.
So what you said is that society was managing for society, right?
Yes.
For what our needs were. Come on, what are you shaking your head about?
The word restoration itself. And if I gave you a 1972 Vespa, and you had no idea what it looked like before, and I told you to restore it, you would restore it to what you felt was right.
Right.
Like you to Reyes, and you'd probably restore it completely different. How are we restoring something when we don't have the original blueprint?
I don't know.
You don't have to have the original blueprint. That's the argument from the restoration ecology standpoint. You can define what that endpoint is.
Isn't that creation?
Whoa! Wait a minute.
But
Humans
we're
are
trying
gods,
to
right?
create something different.
Only Forest Service firefighters.
That's right.
And employees.
I have a, we got that on video too.
I know, right? I can edit that shit out. Okay, yeah, man, go for it. So, I like your analogy, right? The fact of the matter is we don't necessarily know, right? And there's a lot of dispute about what existed 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years before. You know, you can look at palynology, right, or pollen samples, you can look at ice cores, you can look at stuff that goes way, way back, but you still don't know for sure. I mean, I always like to think about the fact that dinosaurs were walking around this compound at one point, right? Do we want to restore it back to the Breckenburn mega whatever? Probably not, because it wouldn't, for one, be awesome for us to have T-Rexes walking around.
Well, I don't know. It could help out with some of the stupid people issues.
Yeah. That's just evolution. That's going to happen regardless.
That's all we're doing pretty much is tailoring it to meet our objectives and our perception the way that we want to see it is all we're doing.
Function.
Can we at least all agree? Would you? Does everyone agree that we want ecological restoration to meet our needs and wants and
But
desires?
that's the problem. We. Who's this defined we? I mean, you can ask all of us to be different than what we expect it to be.
Well, who wins that argument? Actually, that's a good question. What's that, Susie?
Our leader.
Then it changes.
Our
It changes as the leaders change.
All right. Who are the people that determine what we're restoring?
The loudest.
The lobbyists, the one with the
No,
beards.
the loudest.
Oh, I think lobbyists is also pretty
From my perspective, I sit in these IDT meetings and it gives every function some sort of voice.
Mm-hmm.
Wildlife, botany, fire, we all sit there and, some people are very passionate about their resource and they will not budge on anything because it's their resource and it's sacred. But I think we sit in these meetings to get a general consensus of how to get the most out of it and how to get to some sort of functioning ecosystem that benefits all.
All the people in the room.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what it comes down to, right? I think we could agree that at least the approach we take, this interdisciplinary process, which interdisciplinary just means all the disciplines, biologists, ecologists, whatever, hydrologists, they'll all get into a room, and the way we approach this problem, at least in the land management agencies, that we all get together and we make sure everyone has a voice and we try to make sure everyone has, their part said, and that their part is considered, and that maybe we would try to restore a little piece of what is important to them. But we all need to be working as a team. This restoration conversation will keep coming up because it keeps coming up. It's great. Everyone struggles with it. We don't know what it's supposed to look like. Yet, from the highest levels of the Forest Service right now, and other places, it's the name of the game. We have this, ecological restoration is the top priority. If you read our goals, the goals that come down from a high inscribed in stone tablets, it's the ecosystem restoration is numero uno. So, anyway. All right, perfect. Let's move on because we could talk about that forever. Heinzelman's regime. So back to Heinzelman. Remember the dude that took Kilgore stuff, collated it into fire regime categorizations. So he said that the definition of a fire regime, which is I think the first definition, is a summary of the fire history. So just the fire history, right? So the fire that has occurred in the past that characterizes an ecosystem. So the fire that has existed on the landscape, how it defines an ecosystem. And he says the purpose is not to set up a precise classification. So not, like I said, not super rigid, not a precise classification, but make it possible to discuss important differences in the way fire influences. So just have us something to be able to literally just talk about, is all he's trying to say here. He made the regimes for the lake states. We then apply them to the western states. What happens when you take something that's designed for somewhere else? Doesn't always work, especially because the fire regimes in the lake states are quite different. I mean, there's some analogy because there's time, but there's not nearly the fire input. Anyway, they did contain what's a multi-level approach to the fire types, and all that means is that you can have an area, you can have an ecosystem, and it might display more than one fire regime. For instance, it might display, and this happens, 2 or 3 intervals of fire where it's just a nice low intensity fire, and then after a certain point, the next fire that comes through is going to rip it. Okay, and it's just going to do a high severity fire, and that's okay. All he's trying to say is that that's okay. Sometimes you can get that, and that's actually proper. That's the one thing about the Heinzelman's regime, as opposed to the next one I'm going to talk about, which is actually really good, is it has a little more flexibility in that. But it doesn't really talk about, when those are going to be and provide those metrics. Again, this is kind of early. And the examples he had is red pine. Red pine is a lake state species. And Pondo and the fir. Let's see. Oh, I know what I was going to do. Yeah, no, I'm going to move on with that. Okay, so he came up with these 7 regimes. The first one, of course, is no fire. And I want you to really look at how these guys start to break down these regimes, and we're going to get to where we're at now. So the first regime, 1, would be infrequent light surface fire. So infrequent means, obviously, not much fire. It doesn't happen a lot. But light, what do you think he means by light surface fire? Not referring to the fuels necessarily.
Burning in cooler time frames rather than say summer where everything's dry and it could increase intensity of fuels.
It might be. It might actually be. I'm not sure. the way I interpret it is like a low severity, low intensity. That's the way I'm interpreting it. And there's also more than 25-year return interval. So this is an interesting one. So it doesn't happen very much. So more than 20, and so the return interval, right? So how often, and this is all characteristic, right? This is not now. This is if there was no one around, which is silly to even talk about, but if there was no one around and this is just fire on the landscape existing, that you would only have fires 25 years plus. And when you did have a fire, it would be pretty infrequent. So can you think of an ecosystem where these conditions will all add up, where it doesn't happen very much, and when it does happen, it's very light? What would be the preconditions for an ecosystem like that? Jason, what do you think the preconditions for that would be? Do you know what I mean by preconditions?
Yeah, what would be it before?
Exactly.
I'm not really sure.
Well, let's think about it. Let's break it down. It's going to be long intervals between fires. Let's think about the fuels. And when there is a fire, it's not a very intense fire. So what's happening with fuel accumulation in that 25 years between fires?
I'm guessing it's slower.
It's slower.
It doesn't come in as quick, so there's not as much of a buildup.
So what kind of ecosystems exist where you don't have much fuel accumulation over long periods of time?
Desert?
Right, yeah.
Desert would be one.
Arid, climates.
Yeah, probably more arid climates. I could think maybe really high elevation where there's not much input. Maybe something like that. I don't know for sure. I'm throwing it out here, guys.
Short grass prairies are one.
What's that, short grass?
Short grass prairies are definitely
Okay.
classification one.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I was thinking like an evergreen with no brush, no ladder fuel understory maybe.
Oh, that doesn't filter down.
Yeah, so all you have is just pine needles or something that I mean, over 25 years it might be quite a bit, but if it's in, like you said, a high alpine type situation, it's not going to be, it would have to be some, obviously, where there's no human input, but that's, I mean, I guess we were talking about everything in that case, as far as these regimes go. And that's what I was thinking, you know, you have a timber fire with low intensity, the duct could be 2 feet thick, but it's not super intense and there's no brush to get it cranking.
Right, and when the fire came through, also it'd have to be a nice light fire.
Right.
Is this talking about fires, or are you talking about a treated area? Because that could describe a treated area.
Yeah, that's a good question. In this case, I think they're only talking about untouched ecosystems. Yeah, just a characteristic fire regime. So. Anyway, so this is how these are broken down. We don't need to go through all of these, but again, I want to give you this language so that you can look at this stuff and think about, okay, if it's a 2, frequent light surface fires, 1, and so you're going to have a fire 1 to 25-year fire return interval, what's going to make it be that way? So has anybody looked at number 2 yet and started trying to puzzle it out? I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm just curious, has anybody started looking at that? So you have a frequent light surface fire, so it's happening a lot. 1 to 25 years, you know, what's the difference between the fuel accumulation between that one and the other one?
Less fuel loading.
Grass.
It's going to be more, yeah, and probably something that grows quickly. Yeah, probably like grass. I would think like a prairie type thing, maybe a steppe. I don't know what you think. You guys?
Well, I might be
Brooke?
way off, but I was thinking like a riparian area, or that could also fit under number 1, I'm not sure.
Actually, yeah. No, actually, that probably would fit under number 1. Oh, I could see it
Depends
in
on the time of year.
seasonality. Yeah.
Just how moist everything is.
So, and this one is missing seasonality. The seasonality is not even a part of this, right? So it's hard. So this is also, it's kind of a struggle too, because it doesn't provide you a lot of information. It just provides you a little bit of information. Again, this was the first run at trying to create a common language for us to be able to talk about these things. So, anyway, we got 3 infrequent severe surface fires. So there's also not a lot of fire, but when it does happen, it's pretty severe. And what he means by severe is there's a lot of effects, maybe deep, a lot of consumption, you know, deep soil consumption, that sort of thing, on a 25-year interval. All the way through what he got, short return crown fires. This is interesting too because he actually talks about crown fires and surface fires. So he's talking about that extra dimension. He was trying to characterize the ecosystem that much more here. 25 to 100-year intervals. You have 100 to 300-year intervals, which are long return interval crown fires and severe surface fires in combination. So under 5, you're going to have both. So you're going to have, like I would think with 5, this is probably a higher elevation conifer forest. And when it goes, it doesn't go until it does go on a long interval, and then the whole thing goes, right? And so then you got 6, which is greater than 300 years. So those are the 7. It's actually 6 actual fire regimes because remember 0 counts. Okay. So is everybody kind of starting to get how that goes together? This is just one of the ways that they started looking at trying to put this together. Then in 2001, remember what happened in 2001? It's so important to us.
It's a great build-up.
The National Fire Plan, right? National Fire Plan, the build up, the meld, everything. So a lot of things came in the National Fire Plan. Talk about this. Yeah, okay, yeah, I went ahead of myself. So the fire regimes that we use in the National Fire Plan, and we still use to this day, are actually these ones that are built on this Hardy paper. And they tweaked the Heintzelman ones. These are the most commonly used fire regimes. These are the ones that we manage for. These are the ones that you can see in your land management plans, et cetera, et cetera. And what they did is they added severity to it because they recognized that severity, which is again the magnitude of the effect in the ecosystem, was very important, and it's one of the most underlying things. Oh, I have to get you to scratch that area. All right. And they're also used in conjunction with this thing called condition class, which we're going to talk about later. And condition class is important, but it's important for the National Fire Plan, and it's important for our management, but it's not overly useful. Thus, when you see FRCC, the FR is the fire regime, and then CC is the condition class. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. So, there are, how many fire regimes? You guys know? In Hardy? No, in Hardy, I think there's just 5 now. 5 fire regimes, so they reduced them. And the first one, and again, these are the ones, if you're going to actually memorize something, I would urge you to memorize these fire regimes, because these are the ones that we're using now, these are the ones that are important. The first one, fire regime 1, is 0 to 35 years is, what's the 0 to 35 years refer to?
Frequency.
Fire frequency, yep, which is, what's the term though? Fire return interval. Fire return interval. Yep, which is the same as fire frequency, but the technical term is. So 0 to 35 years. So it could happen every year. It could happen, 35 years. That's quite a spread. And then when it comes to severity, it's going to be low to mixed severity. And then it gives a parentheses that explains what low to mixed severity actually means on the landscape. It means that less than 75% of the dominant overstory vegetation is replaced. In other words, when a fire comes through, 75% or more of what was the dominant overstory species is still going to be there. So in terms of severity, that's a very low severity fire. So it's going to have frequent fire, but things are going to exist. Anybody think of a classic fire regime 1? What does it sound like? Timber ecosystem? Whoever, throw it out there.
Sounds like Region 8 does.
Sounds like Region 8. Oh, yeah, I would agree with that actually.
Yeah. That's what they burn for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they burn a lot. Yeah, be that longleaf pine stuff that they burn frequently. Perfect example. What about out west? What about on the Cleveland? Or the Sand Jack? Or the Plumas? What else we got in here? You guys ever burn in Ponderosa pine? Or Mount Laguna? Yeah? So fire regime is this classic, like, you think of this, the Ponderosa pine, right? You familiar with that in Arizona and New Mexico, some of those places? Yeah, the open park-like settings. And we talked about this last time where everyone thinks all the western forests look like this fire regime 1, where the fires are supposed to be coming through every 10 to 15 years. Well, that doesn't exist everywhere. In fact, it doesn't exist that many places. There's just a band in the Sierras. There's some places here, and down into Baja, Mexico, and then over into Arizona and New Mexico. But that's the real classic example of a fire regime 1. So you get frequent fire. There's always been a lot of fire. The understory is pretty open. It's pretty thin. Whenever fire does occur, it's not really that big of a deal. It kills a few trees here and there, maybe some brush pockets, but by and large, the overstory trees, 75% of them are going to be retained. So that's fire regime 1. Fire regime 2 is really just the flip of that. You have frequent fire, so 0 to 35 years, but instead of low to mixed severity, you're jumping to high severity. So standard replacement, again, it's just a flip. Greater than 75% of it is going to be replaced this time. So greater than 75% of the dominant overstory vegetation is replaced. Can you think of some examples of this?
Chaparral?
Chaparral is debatable for fire regime 2. Some people say yes. You will see it modeled as fire regime 2. It depends on who you talk to of what the characteristic fire return interval of chaparral is. Some people think it's as low as 35 years. Some people think it's as high as 300 years. Depends on who you talk to. But you'll actually see 2. But it does fit that model, though, right, of high severity, standard replacement, because in a characteristic chaparral fire, do you get in 75% crown removal? Oh, yeah, absolutely you are. Yep. Was that a clap? Guys need the jack? You guys all right? We're not going to do the jumping jack thing. All right, half an hour more. Did I go already? All right, fire regime 3, 35 to 100 years. So this is the middle one. Okay, this is 35 to 100 years, and when you have a fire, you're getting mixed severity. So it means it could literally go either way. But it does say, to come with the caveat, that less than 75% of the dominant overstory will be replaced. So when you're getting into fire regime 3, you're getting into, a little longer return intervals. When you have a fire come through a fire regime 3, you're getting more pockets that are getting burned out of it, right? You're getting some mosaic, you're getting some areas that are skipped. I'm thinking openings. So if you just think of more of a, sort of a mixed conifer forest, personally, I would think that the area of Palomar that we're going to go to tomorrow, I would think it's more like the fire regime 3, but again, I still don't have my head around that, so we need to talk about that, and hopefully we'll talk about that tomorrow. But again, you're getting in areas where you're getting fire, you're getting mixed results. Most of the overstories are getting replaced, but you might get as much as 25%, or maybe a little bit more of the trees getting taken out of the overstory. So, and then you get into fire regime 4, which you're getting into, again, the same 35 to 100 years. You flip it on, you're getting high severity. So when a fire comes through here, standard replacement, greater than 75% is gone. 35 to 100 years, like I said. Again, what do you think fire regime 4? What would you think of might characterize a fire regime 4?
Wilderness areas.
Say that again?
Wilderness areas.
What vegetation types, though, in wilderness areas?
Timber.
What's it?
Timber.
You could definitely get, so, you say wilderness areas, I'm thinking that you're thinking, and I would agree with this, is, a lot of wilderness areas, high elevation, conifer forests. Yeah, a lot of those areas would be covered by something like this, where you're getting fires that come through infrequently. Yeah, was there somebody? Oh, I thought I heard something.
Well, I kind of have a question.
Please.
So, to the best of my memory, which I could be completely off,
All right.
the fire return intervals for chaparral is that 35-year number, correct? That's like the magic number. So
That's what we've written, well, by we, the Cleveland, that's what we've written down.
Yeah.
So it could go either way.
Well, about 20 to 30 years is where you start to get enough of a dead component to be able to make it be more of a fuel-driven fire. Yeah, but so most of the places you'll see chaparral. You'll see the chaparral defined like chamise, red shank chaparral, the hard chaparral. You'll see it defined as a fire regime 4. So when you look at the maps, and I've got some maps to show you, you'll see some of it in 2, and you'll see most of it in 4. For what it's worth, I personally believe we're probably more in this, because you really do need to get to that 30-year mark or so, and even further, I think, to get enough of a dead component and enough of an understory, or not understory, well, a little bit of an understory, but I was thinking like the litter layer to be able to carry fire underneath it. That being said, you can see chaparral burn younger, but don't be fooled by that. You read a lot of research that says that chaparral will burn, 3 years after chaparral burn. What's burning 3 years after chaparral burn?
Skeletons.
What's that?
Skeletons, whatever.
Well, the skeletons, yeah, that's
grass.
true. But it's not the chaparral, it's the grass between the sprouting chaparral that's burning. So it's a misnomer to say that the chaparral is burning. And for the chaparral itself to be burning, the chaparral has to get to a point where it's filled in enough, it's got enough of a dead component to be able to fuel that fire. Yeah, so if you see a fire in 15 years through a chaparral stand, you'll see some of the bushes burning, right? But what's driving that fire? Remember we always talk about the primary carrier of the fire, the fuel model. That's where some of the research goes off a little bit sideways. Is that they attribute it to the chaparral, but it's really the brush and the forbs and the grasses and stuff that are coming in. So anyway, are we good? So fire regime 4, that's primarily a chaparral. And then again, high severity, that's what it should be doing. It should be replacing the stand. And then the last one is fire regime 5. This is your long interval, greater than 200 years, high severity. So you don't see fire very often. It could be 200 years plus. It could be longer than that. It could be 200 years, 300 years, 400 years. But when you see a fire characteristically through here, most of it's going to go. Stand replacement. Can anybody think of any examples of what this might look like, where this might exist on the landscape? Lodgepole? Say that again?
Lodgepole?
You know, lodgepole.
Or is it shorter?
Lodgepole is actually a much shorter interval, but there are places. Lodgepole is weird because there's different types of lodgepole. So there are some lodgepole stands that go pretty long, but 200 years is pretty long for lodge. It's more of like 80 to 120. But you're right in that it's high severity. It's high severity in stand replacement, or at least characteristically it is. Yeah, and even that whole like cone serotiny thing is different. In California, you don't have nearly the serotiny that you do in the Great Basin, in Colorado, and those places. Right? It's pretty serotinous in Colorado, isn't that? Yeah. Okay.
Not as much though as the pondos.
Really? Okay. You guys know what cone serotiny is? Or serotinous? You guys ever heard that term where? It's where there's these cones that come on species, especially like say lodgepole pine is a great example of that. You guys ever seen lodgepole pine in Great Basin, Idaho, Colorado? There's some in California, but it doesn't act like the rest of the nation. Yellowstone, it's a classic example. You guys ever been to Yellowstone? Seen the fires around there? It's kind of like, I always call it the chaparral of the timber species, because it's very continuous, and when it burns, it just freaking nukes. And it's really not like, you can't like thin it. It's really, you can't thin it. You can't do things like that. Like just like we can't really thin chaparral, it just doesn't work. But its reproduction strategy is to, not all the cones, but a lot of the cones just hang out on the tree, and it creates the cone. The seeds are inside, and it has these waxy binder that holds the cone closed, and the only thing that will open it up is heat. So you either drop off the tree and get heat, or a lot of them actually stay on the tree, and then the fire will rip through, it will release, and it's kind of like a time delay. It's not always while the fire is going on, because it doesn't make sense for the tree to drop the seeds into the fire, does it? So it'll come through, and then that terpene, whatever, wax substance will, the resin, will slowly release and then drop the trees out. And then you get a whole carpet of brand new lodgepole pine. So it's pretty analogous actually to chaparral in a lot of ways. Slightly different reproductive strategy. So, not sure how we got on lodgepole, but I love lodgepole, it's cool. Alright, and then, so 5, oh right, so 5, where are we going to see 5? Where are we going to see this? Redwoods? I would agree, well, redwoods, that's an interesting one. What is redwoods? I think redwoods used to see more fire, but it was lower severity. I want to say naturally, or maybe in that 35, I would say maybe a 3. I don't know, anybody have any inputs to that? What do you think? Fire regime 3, redwoods? That's why, if you don't know, look it up. You can look up any of this stuff online. If you go to the Fire Effects Information System, the FEIS website, which I'll show you guys later, it has all that information. So, 200 years, you're looking at the cliche version of the Fire Regime 5 is the high elevation, like subalpine fir, white fir, whatever, the real high elevation. That takes 200 years or more for enough fuel to accumulate, because you're thinking your growing season is maybe 5-6 weeks long, right? So it takes many years for them to grow, accumulate, trees to fall over and die, create that condition. And then on top of that, you have to have a long enough, in that year you have to have a long enough snow-free period for the fuels to get dry enough, and you have to have an ignition. So you have to have a lot of factors that contribute to there even being an ignition in a fire that goes. So every 250 years you get a drought year, and you get an ignition in the right spot, and it goes. That's the example of that.
I imagine it to be like red for white pine.
For white pine. Okay. And that's supposed to be in the Sierras? Yeah. Okay.
High elevation. Yeah, high elevation. Normally, the white pine isn't a dominant producer of ground cover, and it takes a while for the red fir to produce that duck layer to have it be substantial enough to move the fire up into the grounds.
All right, so time.
Yeah.
Time limited. Perfect. Nutrient limited, all that sort of thing. Okay, so those are the 5 fire regimes. Those are the ones we manage for now, and these are the ones that you should probably become mostly familiar with, and you'll see in documents and NEPA documents and that sort of thing.
Where do grasslands fit in there?
Where do you think grasslands fit in here? It depends on the grassland, but
I was just looking at it. The overstory in grassland would be predominantly what?
the grass.
Okay, so.
Yeah, remember we talked about like crown fire?
Right.
A grass fire is a crown fire. If there's no trees or anything else, whatever is the highest fuel is actually the overstory. So in a grassland, the grass is the overstory. It's good to remember though, and it's a good point to reiterate. So if it's a frequent fire regime, it probably would go. Remember, you break it down. What's the interval? What's the severity? Right. So grass is always going to be high severity because mostly when grass burns, the whole thing burns, right? And then most grass ecosystems are propagated by frequent fire. So yeah, it'd be solidly a 2. Yeah. Any other questions about ecosystems? Try to categorize them. Remember, I mean, all the information is there. You say, okay, what is a Jeffrey fine or whatever? You know, you start breaking it down. The one thing I think is interesting about these hardy regimes is 3 of the 5 are in the high category. 4th is mixed, so that could go high, but there's actually only 1 that's a low severity regime. What does that tell you about our western ecosystems? There's a lot of high severity. Remember I talked about that cliche of our western forests being these like, I don't know, fairies skipping around in low severity fires and open park-like settings. A lot of our forests just aren't like that. Some of them can have fires like that, but it's not the way most of our forests are set up. They're set up to be, at least 35 years, and that's a relatively frequent, even as much as 100 years between fires. And then when they go, a lot of it does go. So.
Do they give these fire regimes to what they characteristically were or what they are currently?
That's a good question. These are the characteristic ones. Again, the fallacy is inherent in it that this even exists in the first place. So that's why even when you're trying to classify these ecosystems and trying to classify these fire regimes, sometimes you're like, well, it maybe should be this, and it has like the sylvics, which is like what makes up the trees and defines the tree species, right? And the characteristics of the species. Like the sylvics would seem to indicate this, but it's not displaying that now. So then you have to ferret out, well, is it the intervention of man? Is it, climate change? Is it whatever?
I was thinking along the lines of the Santa Ana Mountains. The Chibuco Ranger District was once timber, what everyone's telling me, specifically in Silverado area, and it was all timber, and it all got cut down for the mining operation.
Really? I've never heard that before.
I've seen old pictures of the place, and it was littered with.
Was it? What kind of? Was it big cone Doug fir?
I'm not a big. Wouldn't be able to tell you the pictures, but.
Yeah.
So I was always told that it was all timber. Even there were bears, grizzly bears there too. So it was totally different than what it used to be. More than 100 years, 150 years ago.
I'm trying to remember. I think there actually is. I think there's big cone Doug fir up there. I'm willing to bet that that's probably the main, because all that stuff on the top's been planted. That's all the hybridized, weird knob cone.
Yeah, well, there's some in like the canyon, deep in the canyons that are, I'm sure someone didn't plant them there. But you look at all the pictures of roads that they were cutting through there, and it's all timber.
I'm going to bet it's big cone Doug fir, and we're going to look at that at Palomar tomorrow. And we're going to talk about it. So big cone Doug fir is a tree species. It's an overstory species, and it exists in the chaparral. You see it in those canyons. You guys have all probably seen the little pockets of fir trees that are in the chaparral pockets. Are always in drainages because it's a tree, so it needs a little more moisture. And the thing about it is, you think about it, you have a pocket of trees that's existing in the chaparral field. Is that tree species going to have a different fire regime than the chaparral around it? Yes? No, probably not, I would think. Because think about it, you have a big field of chaparral and you have a pocket of trees, like an acre pocket of trees, that's going to be affected by the fire. So big cone Doug fir has adapted to exist in that fire. Does anybody know how big cone Doug fir has adapted to exist in a what we would say like a fire regime 4? Any idea? It's one of the very few conifer species that does what's called epicormic sprouting, which is sprouting off the branches. Yeah, most pine trees and softwoods in general will not sprout at all. They won't sprout off the base. They won't sprout off the branches. That's really something that the hardwoods do. But big cone Doug fir actually will just get torched, and as long as it's not too bad, because remember, chaparral fires are pretty intense, but they burn through pretty quick. So the Doug fir stands, they can deal with that, and then they re-sprout, and they have some protected buds and that sort of thing. So.
Right, and I would assume that it would be different from the chaparral around it because of the microclimate that it creates.
Right.
More moisture, more shade. Probably the brush component isn't as high because of the shade, and so it gives it a little more resistance to what's around it.
Yeah, I could see that. Probably since it's maybe when the fire burns through there in the chaparral, maybe it burns a little less intense, maybe a little bit of a buffer.
But I have no idea.
Yeah. We'll take a look at it tomorrow. We're going to see some areas that burned through fir stands, and a lot of it was driven by it, and they just got nuked. But then there's other areas we're going to look at that took fire, but then it came back too. So, have to look into that more. Okay, where are we at? We still got some time? Everybody good? 15 more minutes? You not good? You good? All right, cool. All right, so again, the hardy ones are what we manage for in the National Fire Plan. This is what we use in our land management plans in NEPA and elsewhere. I guess if there was a standard fire regime, this would be it. So these are the hardy ones. It's a good time today, actually. Any questions about that? Any questions about what goes into that? Fire return? Okay.
Going back to the big, the firs.
Yes.
Unfortunately, on the Cutka fire, we didn't get to burn any down, so we weren't able to cut any down to look at the fire.
Yeah.
Scars on those, but as far as actually restoring, going back to restoring, why aren't those being looked at to get an idea of fire regimes?
Actually, they are. There's a paper, can't remember the author. I've got it, and I can share it. Probably would be a good one to share here in this class. Anyway, they looked at, they did a fire frequency analysis, I think, and they used the Doug firs. Yeah, I can't remember the details on it.
I think I have a copy of it
Yeah, you know what I'm
at
talking
work,
about?
so I can put it on the little blog thing you got going.
Sure, man, put it on the blog.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, let's make sure we get that up on there. And it basically goes through, and it's got actually some really cool pictures of Palomar Mountain as well. Yeah, I should have remembered that one. But I don't remember what it says now, so I'm not going to pull it out. But, yeah,
Basically, they were just kind of using it to really nail down what the fire return interval is in chaparral. Basically, because when chaparral burns, there's nothing left.
Yeah.
So they were using the fire scars on the big cones to find out what was that return interval.
That's right, because the big cone's in the chaparral. That's right, that's what it was. What were the results of that? Do you remember what they were turning on?
I think it was in that 35 range.
Yeah.
I read it a couple months ago.
So that's the thing, is that the chaparral, there's a lot of discussion about what it should be. Some people should be longer. I do think it, if you just look at it physiologically, like look at it when it's getting ready to burn, or when it's available to burn, and I think that should tell you. Okay, does that answer, or does that at least get you going?
No.
We'll get you that paper. Yeah, we'll follow up with that, for sure. Wish I had time. I might have time to grab it tomorrow morning, at least a copy of it, before we head up. I might actually have it in here too. Alright, so, there's actually not really a name for it. They talk about it in the Fire in California Ecosystems book, and I can't remember if it's in the chapter that you guys read or not. But Sugihara Jan van Wangendonk, never get his name right, Joanne Feitz-Kaufman, created this section in the FICE text, and they call it the New Framework Fire Regimes. Now, this has not been adopted anywhere, but it's really, really good and it's really flexible, and it helps you define what I think fire regimes in a much more robust way. I wish that it was used more. I wish that it was incorporated into land management plans, or if we ever have another fire policy that comes out, I think it would be a great thing to include in it, just because it's so much better. And it defines a lot more of it defines the factors. Remember those fire regime factors that go into it? Defines those a lot better and provides you flexibility within those factors as well too. So I want to take some time, and we'll get started with it. We got a little bit of time. Anyway, so there's more metrics. There's a lot more metrics than just fire return interval and the severity. There's, I think, like 8 or something, actually maybe more. And because of the fact that there's more metrics, there's a lot more ability to describe it. There's more robustness in it. So you can really get into more detail. But the problem with it, if you want to consider this a problem, is it really requires the user to have a much more thorough understanding of the metrics themselves, right? So you guys all know the whole thing of junk in, junk out. So if you don't really understand and have a good ability to go and look at the science and the research to be able to choose the metrics within that, then it's going to, you'll probably go sideways. I don't know if I'm doing a good job of explaining. I'm simply saying you have to really understand what you're talking about in order to use it appropriately. But the thing is that it's not that hard. You just have to dive into it a little deeper. Maybe look at some research papers to be able to help make a determination about, okay, what is the fire return interval? So, it's another one of those things is where, you might go do some research and there might not be much conflict in the scientific research about what a fire return interval is. Or there might be conflict. Like chaparral, people are arguing, even now in the literature, what is the actual fire return interval. So you have to make a choice at some point and then plug it in. So anyway, again, within each factor there's a range, and it actually gets differentiated by veg type. Because it's so big, you're not going to get a list. Like this new framework fire regime, there's no like fire regime 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It wouldn't work that way. There'd be hundreds of different possibilities, and because there would be so many different possibilities, like no one's ever going to be able to remember what's a fire regime 76 versus a fire regime 32. You know what I mean? You have to actually look at the actual list that gets determined. And then it's broken up into these 3 categories or classifications, right? Temporal, what's temporal? Time, right? So the landscape across time. Spatial, is it spatial is? The area, the landscape itself, right? And then magnitude. You know what magnitude might refer to?
Severity.
Severity, yes, exactly. Severity is in the magnitude one. It's talking about the magnitude of it, sort of like the extent of the interaction. What's that?
The extent of the process.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good way of putting it. So temporal, under temporal, there's seasonality and fire return interval. So both of those are related to time, right? The season, when it burns, and then the interval. The interval is actually related to seasonality in a lot of ways, and we'll get into that. Spatial, so the size of the fire, and then the spatial complexity, so literally just how complex it is. That term mosaic, you all know the term mosaic. That's really what they're talking about with spatial complexity. Magnitude, the intensity of it, the severity, and the fire type. So before I dive into this new framework, this is a natural breaking point for us. It's a little bit before 11:30. What do you guys want to do? Do you want to? I'm inclined to stop for lunch. I'd normally try to stop at 11:30. I don't know if you guys need to go out. So how do you feel about this as input time?
Good.
That sounds good.
You want to stop? All right. So are we good with that? All right. We'll take a break. We'll come back at 12:15, so 45 minutes. If you need to bring food and bring it back here and eat it, that's not a problem. We'll take a break from this, and then Lisa is scheduled to do her presentation immediately after lunch, which is always a good time to do it. And then we'll resume our lecture after that. All right, thanks for your attention this morning, guys. See you at 12:15.